Okay, thanks very much for joining me. What I want to do today is take an alternative view at the swinging 60s and the idea that the United Kingdom was a country which was very hip, very modern, very trendy, and where people were doing well and it was prosperity, and instead take this view of the what I would describe as the have-nots, the people that were not doing as well. And our focus for that, where we're going to start with that, is a TV drama, a film essentially, which was shown in November 1966, and it was Cathy Come Home. It was shown on the BBC, it was shown on a Wednesday evening. It was a slot which was essentially known as showing a play on television, but to you and me, that would be a film. And this film portrayed a couple, a young couple in London in the 1960s who start off very well. They've got a job, they've got a nice house, they've got a flat with all these nice trappings. The wife then becomes pregnant. The husband then is ill at work, he's injured. And you follow their state of decline, how they end up struggling to pay for their accommodation, how they move into council housing, how that then falls through, how they rely on private landlords, how that falls through, how they end up living in a caravan, how that fails. And ultimately, in the final scene, you see Cathy, the mother, sat at a train station, it's Liverpool Street Station in London, and her two children are taken into care. And it was a devastating piece of television. It won many awards. It is still recognised as being one of the most dramatic things that was shown on television. And it really changed people's perception of homelessness and of real poverty that was happening in the country at this time. And to help you understand that, I'm going to read to you a quote that was from the Guardian newspaper at that time. And the Guardian said, "It has shown us how heedless we can be, how heartless some of us are." That was from the Guardian newspaper, 1966. So Cathy Come Home is our starting point this time. It's a TV documentary, a TV drama, a film, which allows people to have an insight into poverty and homelessness at that time. Now, don't forget, previously we've looked at how the media changed in the 1960s with Hugh Green becoming Director General of the BBC. You can make a link here between Hugh Green becoming Director General of the BBC, wanting more modern, more challenging television to be broadcast, and the broadcast of Cathy Come Home. So you can use Cathy Come Home as an example when you're talking about Hugh Green as well. However, at the same time, they weren't planned to be happening together. This is pure coincidence. But in December 1966, in response to the housing crisis, in response to homelessness and slum accommodation, the charity Shelter was formed. And there are a number of factors that caused that. And you need to know these because when we're writing our essays at A-level, where in English you would include a quote to back up an argument, in history, you need to be backing it up with detail, with evidence, with facts. So let's go through some facts that help us understand the situation in 1966. So 14% of the population, that's 7.5 million people, were described as living in poverty. Homelessness and poverty had now become a political issue. We have the realisation that politicians in the 1950s had been too complacent about poverty. Remember, Macmillan gave his speech where he said, most of us have never had it so good. And now we're looking at this from an alternative view that the reality is a lot of people were in poverty at that time. And between 1965 and 1975, the bottom 80% of the population owned only 10% of the nation's wealth. So what we're saying here is 80% of the people don't have that much money. They only have 10% of the money that's in bank accounts and things like that. And 1966, 3 million homes lacked bathrooms and hot running water, things we would take for granted today. 1963, we've got Manchester having 80,000 slum homes. And it's because of that that the charity Shelter was established in 1966. So it was a really, really stark situation. And to help Shelter emphasise that, to show the reality of England essentially during that period, They commissioned a photographer, Nick Hedges, to go around the country and photograph homes. And what I'm doing now is I'm showing you some of the photographs that he took at that time. And think about these in contrast to pictures you would normally see of the swinging 60s, of the Mini, designed by Alex Issigonis, by Twiggy, the model, the Beatles. And yet you've got this side of London as well happening, this side of England happening as well. People living in abject poverty. As well as families living in poverty, you also had a second group of people, and these were pensioners. These had often been forgotten. Many of them are living alone, and again, many are living on the breadline or below the breadline. So once again, I'm going to show you some facts, some detail to help back up arguments to explain why these group of people will be described as the forgotten part of England, the forgotten part of Great Britain during the 1960s. Now we've got 8 million people who are elderly by the end of the 1960s. And the Sheffield Star starts a campaign that specifically focuses on the plight of pensioners during this period. We've got 350,000 pensioners. We know bathroom, kitchen or indoor toilet. We're talking about people in their 60s, 70s and 80s here. 2 million of them had no indoor toilet, and 1.5 million of them are living alone. And 300,000 are in the need of urgent sheltered accommodation. So you get this idea now. So if we're going to say that the 1960s was a period of affluence, was a period of progress, was a period of change, and Harold Wilson's white heat of technology, this is your counter-argument. We've got people still living in poverty. We've got people who are still struggling. Then as always, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up a couple of quotes to help us really put that into perspective, to really give that some clear understanding in our own minds. Now, I'm going to go back to Dominic Sandbrook's book, White Heat. It is really the go-to, as far as I'm concerned, for this period. He explains it very well. He goes into quite a bit of detail. So we're going to go back to this to look at what he says. And Sandbrook says, as public enthusiasm for the glitter of swinging London began to wane, so newspapers began to pay more attention to the dark side of life in the 1960s. The Guardian, for example, noted that people had had the conscience badly shaken about homelessness in Britain, while the Times noted that the public conscience finds it unacceptable that in a relatively wealthy society, so much bad housing is allowed to stand. So many people live in unhealthy homes, that so many live in hopeless overcrowding. So that's a really useful piece we can use. If again we're writing about this period, we can quote Sandbrook if we want to add that depth into our essay. And then finally we're going to look at a quote from a teenage mother during that period. She had left her home and she'd been thrown out by her mother. Her partner was abusive, so she had to leave that home as well for the sake of her own safety and that of her child. And then we look at what happened to her, and it's worth looking at this quote as well. She says, I had a boy in nappies and I was pregnant. I just stuffed everything in the pram and took off. I went to several places, but when they saw me with a baby and looking like I had no money, they didn't want to know. It was hard at the best of times getting a place when you had a baby, so I ended up on King's Cross Station and slept there for a week. I was regularly kicked out and I'd just walk around pushing the baby. My biggest fear was having my son taken into care away from me. So that's a quite stark personal account of the 1960s. So what we've looked at now, we've looked at Cathy Come Home, we've looked at homelessness, and we've looked at the plight of pensioners. All this counter-argument to Harold Wilson's idea of the white heat of technology and 1960s England, 1960s Great Britain being a place of prosperity and a place of affluence. We're going to carry on looking at this kind of theme though. We're going to look at feminism and how the role of women changes. We're going to look at immigration as well and how those groups of society experience the 1960s. Okay, till next time, I'll see you later. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.